Well, if you think you're paying more, a lot more, for the things you buy these days, you're right.
According to Statistics Korea on Thursday, the consumer price index for June stood at 104.87.
First of all, if you look at the Oldham town centers businesses, I think that many businesses are closed.
When you think about the word inflation, the first thing that probably comes into your mind is the image of a balloon being pumped with air. If only our topic today would be that happy and jolly. The inflation I will be talking to you about is the inflation that happens to our economy, or how the price of goods and services gradually grow as time passes. If you're fond of reading old comic books, you've probably noticed that some scenes with the shops in them show burgers priced at around 30 to 40 cents. Crazy, right? Nowadays, you'd be able to get a burger for roughly $3, and that's already one of the cheaper prices. That drastic increase in cost, my friend, is caused primarily by inflation. So for today, sit back and relax as I tell you all about how things have gotten more expensive over time, and how they stand to become even more expensive over the next century. This is Business Explained. To learn more about all things money, get educated about how to do business, become business savvy, and enjoy more videos like these, subscribe to my channel and click on the notification bell, and may you be granted with many, many sweet returns. Now, before we dive deeper into the ins and outs of inflation, let's take a look at 4 everyday commodities and how much they were priced 100 years ago, just to give you a general idea of how prices have risen over the years. So first up, we have eggs. Everyone I know buys eggs during their grocery trips, and it is a universally recognized breakfast food. Considering that the year is now 2020, let's take a look at how much eggs were priced in 1920. According to my research, a dozen eggs only cost 24 cents in 1920. What? Nowadays, a dozen eggs could cost anywhere from $1 to $7, depending on the quality of the eggs. That means it is more than quadrupled in price. Next up, we have bread. Bread is, I believe, a staple food for many households all over the world. In the 1920s, bread cost roughly 12 cents, and that was for a pound of it. Today, a loaf of bread costs $2.50 to $3. So over the past 100 years, the price of bread went up by over 20 times. For our third item on the list, we have coffee. Now, I love coffee, but I don't love having to pay $5 to $6 a cup every time I head on over to my local coffee shop. Did you know that in 1920 a pound of coffee cost roughly 47 cents? Crazy, I know. But over the past few years, the price of coffee has risen. Although it did not rise as much as the price of eggs and bread, a pound of coffee today costs about $1. Now lastly, we have bacon. Bacon. Best eaten when hot and crispy and served alongside a fried egg. But wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Bacon used to cost only 50 cents per pound. Nowadays, bacon costs a whopping $5.47 per pound. Wow! That means its cost grew 100 times what it once was. Now imagine that you were born in the 1920s and you were shopping at your local grocery store. You could get all of these things for less than $2. However, people back then also did not earn as much as people do today. That means that the value of goods and the value of money was relatively greater before. So why did the price of these goods and salaries of an average citizen increase? A large part of it has to do with inflation. Because of inflation, life is now much more expensive for you than it was for your parents when they were growing up. Inflation is defined by Investopedia as a quantitative measure of the rate at which the average price level of a basket of selected goods and services in an economy increases over a period of time. While some goods and services have had fluctuating prices over the years, it's still safe to say that the cost of things now are so much more expensive than they were 100 years ago. Heck, even just 70 years ago. In the 1950s, buying a new house cost somewhere around $2,900. 30 years later, in the 1980s, it had escalated to $47,200. Nowadays, you'd be lucky if you could find anything that is remotely close to that price range. The average cost for a house today is roughly $180,000. That is why the average age of new homeowners today is 40 years old. Whereas during the 50s, people in their mid to late 20s were able to buy their own home. Nowadays, many people feel that even if you do have a full-time job, they don't get enough income to pay for the things that they need and want. Sometimes the money that comes in isn't even enough to cover the basics. Families with kids need to factor in the rising tuition rates in university and private schools, and the price on quality education just keeps going up year after year. However, some analysts have pointed out that inflation can only account for so much of the rise in price, as the dollar has much less buying power than it had even just a few decades ago. What people earn today does not cover as much as it did years ago, and that's because, while households' income has indeed been rising over the years, it has not been able to keep up with the rise in price of various commodities. This is especially evident in the housing and automobile markets. That's probably why a lot of ordinary citizens have trouble buying their own homes and a brand new car, as the price for both have skyrocketed. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has made available an inflation calculator to allow people to see how much inflation has impacted the value of the dollar over a given period of time. For example, something that would have cost $20 in 1999 would cost $31 in 2020. Now you might think that it's not that big of a jump, but if every single commodity that you've been accustomed to purchasing has risen by $11, just think about how much extra money you'd have to be shelling out. However, inflation is not the sole reason for the increase in prices over the years. The Bureau of Census has reported that in 2000 the average price of a home was around $194,000. If we play it out according to inflation alone, the price should have been around $297,000. However, the average sale price for a house in January 2020 was $402,400, over 35% higher than what it would have been worth if it was caused by inflation alone. Various other factors play into the price of goods and services over the years. Some analysts have even suggested that advancements in science and technology have significantly reduced prices of certain tech over the years. Take smartphones, for example. When the first smartphone came out in the market, they were significantly more expensive than how much they cost today. That's because, over time, mass production of these gadgets became easier and allowed manufacturers to produce more at less cost. However, regardless of this, it still can be said that the price of a lot of our daily necessities have gone up considerably, and that each dollar we make can buy less than it was able to years ago. So why does inflation even happen? What are its causes and catalysts? Well, there are several main causes. The first is demand pull inflation. That means that demand is growing much faster than supply. An increase in demand leads to an increase in the price level because suddenly more and more people can now afford to buy things on the market. When supply cannot keep up with its demand, inflation happens. The second is cost push inflation. An increase in the cost of firms is pushed onto the consumers. And there are many factors to take into consideration for this cause of inflation, like an increase in wages and increase in import prices. An increase of wages means an increase of worker spending power, which leads to a rise in demand for particular goods and services. Another factor is a rise in price for raw materials, like oil, for example. If the price of oil goes up, it will affect the portion of the globe that is dependent on oil. So what are the implications of this on costs of the commodities over the next 100 years? Well, the safe answer is, it's indeterminate just by how much the price of things would go up. Some say that inflation would certainly have a very big impact on the price of goods and services. Nearly every country in the world is deep in debt or has a budget deficit. Historically, interest rates on debt have been very low, which allows for countries to pay off the interest. However, when the interest rates revert to normal, as analysts say they would, the two possible outcomes would be either inflation or a default on the debt, both of which would have massive implications on the lives of the average consumers. Either scenario would lead to a lot of people having a difficult time with their finances. We've already talked about the dangers of massive inflation in a few of my other videos, but let me just draw back to the case of Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe's reign. The nation was driven into hyperinflation when the government began printing out way more money than it was supposed to. This was triggered by Mugabe's initiative to give farmlands which once belonged to white farmers to soldiers who had fought in the war. Because the soldiers were not as skilled in farming, this led to a decline in production, which prompted the government to print more money to distribute amongst the people of Zimbabwe. However, this led to a drastic hyperinflation. It devalued the Zimbabwe dollar so badly that Zimbabwe had even released a $1 trillion bill into the market for people to be able to pay for basic goods and commodities. Until now, the Zimbabwe dollar has not recovered from such a drastic devaluation. If things progress like they do now, we are looking to see inflation drastically rise the prices of goods and services over the next century. However, only time will be able to tell. What are your thoughts on inflation? How much do you think bread will cost 100 years from now? By how much do you think that inflation would increase the prices of goods and services over the next few years? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I will respond to all of you who comment within the first hour. If you enjoyed this video, you should definitely check out my other video called The Business of East India Company, the First Monopoly. The East India Company was able to amass a massive amount of wealth by trading in things like tea and textiles. However, it actually went much deeper than you think. It all started in the 1500s, when European explorers began sailing and going on expeditions around the world for the purpose of trading and expanding their territories. That signaled the beginning of the East India Company, but it eventually led to a lot of bloodshed. Intrigued? If so, stay tuned for my next video and sit back and relax as I tell you about how the East India Company began, and how this company was able to massively impact Indian society. Stay tuned, stay educated.